radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this November 6th, Wednesday, November 6th, 2024, so day after the election. I hope everybody has had a good week so far. I am in Nashville, my hotel room, so I don't have a lot of time, so we'll make this a short show. You can ask questions, I'll try to squeeze it all in, and of course if I don't, I'll carry them over to tomorrow. I do have one more event. I've done a breakfast event, a lunch event at the Federalist Society. I gave a talk at the Federalist Society at Vanderbilt University, and I will be heading to give a talk for the Bastiat Society tonight. So I figured I'd try to squeeze in a quick commentary on the election. I figured you guys would be eager to hear from me. And it seems like I was right. There was a lot of people waiting even before I got started. So happy to see all of you here. All right, let's just jump into it. As I said, it will be a short show. I expect the whole show to be about an hour, maybe an hour 15. But please feel free to use the Super Chat feature to ask questions or just to use it as a sticker to support my efforts in doing these shows as I travel around the world. Next show will be from Denver, and the show after that, probably also from Denver, or from Buenos Aires, probably Buenos Aires. All right, so bottom line is, the scenario I said I feared the most is the one that happened. If you remember, my ideal scenario was that Trump loses in a landslide. Well, Trump won, not quite in a landslide, but close to it. He won a resounding victory, an unequivocal victory. And he won the popular vote, first Republican to win the popular vote since 2004. And that was on the big high of George Bush and 9/11 and all of that. George Bush was not that popular. Within a year, he wouldn't have won the popular vote. So he won the popular vote in 2004. So Trump just won the popular vote by a good margin, 2 to 3%. That's a good margin. We'll see what the final numbers are. I haven't seen the final numbers, but we'll probably won't know those for a little while. They still haven't finalized places like Arizona and Nevada. And let's see, what else? You were developing a Yaron withdrawal syndrome? I skipped one day. Frederick, you got to get a life. Republicans won the Senate, again, pretty resoundingly. They not only flipped West Virginia, which everybody expected, but they also flipped Ohio, which should have been expected, but was not easy. And they flipped Montana, which again was expected. So they have 52 right now. They have an opportunity still in Pennsylvania. With almost all the votes counted, the lead is less than half of 1%. So it's tiny. That's why it hasn't been called yet. But there's a good chance the Republican candidate in Pennsylvania will win. There is also a good chance that the Republican will win in Nevada, which would be a surprise. The Democrat was favored in Nevada, but there's a chance now there. The percentage of the vote is smaller being called, so there's still, and it's very, very close. So there's still the potential for the Democrat to win. So they will have at a minimum 52, maximum probably 55, but probably realistically 54. They haven't called Arizona yet, but the Republican Kari Lake is lagging by 3 points in Arizona. They came very, very close to winning in the Senate in both Michigan and in Wisconsin, which would have been huge, and they could have gotten to filibuster range as 58 Senates, but they won't get to that. It'll be either 52 or 54, 52, 53, or 54. That's my prediction. Maybe 55, but that would be quite an earthquake in Arizona if that happened. But they have a good majority in the Senate. They haven't had that in a while. And, well, since the first Trump term in 2016. And then we don't have final results from the House, but it would be, I think, highly unlikely that the Democrats could win the House at this point. Clearly, the country has sided with Republicans, presidential, with the president, with Trump, and then with the Senate. I mean, it would be bizarre if suddenly in the House everybody decided to vote Democratic. So I expect the Republicans to win the House as well. I don't think it'll be a huge margin, but they will win the House, and Johnson will return as Speaker. As I said, this was my worst case scenario because this gives Republicans or the Trump administration complete control of all three houses. It does put us in a situation where the only thing to restrain Trump is the filibuster, and would Republicans repeal the filibuster? They did for Supreme Court nominees. That was Republicans, remember. Everybody blames the Democrats for wanting to get rid of the filibuster, but the filibuster was eliminated by Republicans for the purpose of Supreme Court nominees. Would they do it more broadly? Yeah, they could definitely do it more broadly. So there is, I do fear the fact that Trump controls now all the levels of power, at least short of the Supreme Court. And now, I guess, we wait and see. We wait and see primarily how serious Trump was about his proposals. I hope not very. How able he is to actually get them done, and actually get anything done. We will see. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of energy. But, they're still building the wall that Trump promised in 2016. So I don't have particularly confidence in the ability of Trump to get anything done, substantively done. This is good for tax cuts in a sense that the tax cuts will probably be extended. He's got the majority in the Senate. He'll probably get those extended. It's very bad for things like tariffs and deportation, which are more likely to happen now because he really gets a sense. This wasn't a close election. This was, and he said this in his acceptance speech, this was a mandate, a significant mandate the American people have given him. And therefore, I think he's going to rush into tariffs and deportation. Now the question is, are there going to be people around him who stop him? I don't know. If he asked Jamie Dimon to be his Treasury Secretary, which I think is unlikely, but he might, Jamie might be able to convince him not to put on tariffs. But if there's no adults in the room, then he's going to do it, and we will all suffer the consequence of that. If he has the power to deport people, to deport not just people. Obama deported more people in any 4 years of his administration that Trump did between 2016 and 2020. But if he decides to do mass deportation on the scale of, 10 million people, that is going to be a big deal, and that'll have real consequences that we will all pay for. But we will see. We will see if he actually does it. Again, he wanted to build a wall. He didn't really build one. So who knows what he's actually going to do. Peace. He says he wants to bring peace. I don't think Donald Trump has a clue on how to do that. But we will see. Let's see. We'll see. Supposedly, before he's inaugurated, he's got 2 months. Supposedly he promised a settlement between Russia and Ukraine that does not involve the complete surrender of Ukraine. That'll be quite something. I'll give him credit for that if he can do that, but I fear that Ukraine is pretty much screwed. In Israel, bring about peace. He tried, we'll see. We'll see. Good luck to him. I'm skeptical. You're already seeing a lot of fake news out there. So there was a story I saw on Twitter for a minute. I thought, what? But it didn't take more than half a minute to figure out it was fake news. Supposedly the Houthis came out today with an announcement that now that Donald Trump is president, they will cease all attacks in the Red Sea. Turned out to be complete bullshit and complete nonsense. But that is the kind of fake news you're probably going to see a lot of in the days and weeks in weeks to come. So yes, expect a lot of nonsense like that, but let's see what actually happens. Okay, so let's try to do an analysis, of what happened. Why did Trump win, and why did Trump win so big? And I think there are three causes, and I think one of the really interesting things that I think everybody has to think about is why he did so big, why he did so well with Hispanics. But we'll get to that. Oh, here's a prediction. I want to make a prediction. I predict. Whoops. Are we still on? Is everything okay? Did video go away and come back, or is it just me? Okay, looks like it's okay. Here's my prediction. My prediction is that by the middle of February, certainly by the end of February, let's make it the end of February. By the end of February, Americans will think the economy is doing great. So when asked how the economy is by the end of February, and particularly Republicans, all the people who said the economy sucks, the economy is awful, the economy is terrible, the economy is horrible, I feel so bad, the future is awful, the present is awful, everything's terrible, everything sucks. By the end of February, as soon as Trump becomes president, the economy will flip, and they will all say the economy is fantastic, I've never done better, I'm doing phenomenal, things are great. So I think the perception of how well the economy is completely political, has very little to do with how the economy actually does. That's just a prediction. You can test me on that once we get to February. It might happen even before that. For all we know, just the euphoria of knowing that Trump won will have affected everybody's opinion about the economy already before that. The stock market is soaring today, of course, partially because the uncertainty is over. Whenever uncertainty is over, the market goes up. I would have expected the market to go up even if Harris won. The market's going up more because Trump won, because in certain parts of the economy, let's say banks up like, last time I looked, they were up like 10%. And the big reason for that is Biden was awful for banks. The regulatory regime, the people he put at the head of the regulatory agencies were terrible for banks and terrible for bank consolidation. I think right now what's being priced is bank consolidation is back. And the regulatory agencies have become much friendlier and much easier to deal with, and therefore valuations have spiked as a consequence. For the rest of big business, tech and other big businesses, I think they expect this to be very good. Trump has talked about cutting corporate taxes. That'd be good for them. Trump has also talked about giving Elon Musk will bring kind of industrial policy into the White House and help Trump pick winners and losers, and I think the big businesses that are in the stock market figure they will be the winners, whether that filters down to small and medium-sized businesses. I do not know. I can tell you this, that to the extent that Trump is serious about, tariffs on everybody, universal tariffs across the board, to that extent, American businesses are going to suffer as everybody else is going to suffer, and they are overvalued right now. But Trump is probably good for the stock market. I will say that if you look at Trump's stock market performance and you look at other presidents' stock market performance in 2016, it wasn't that much better than other presidents. Stock markets generally go up and over the terms of presidents, and there's almost no correlation between whether a Democrat or Republican wins in terms of the performance of the stock market. So be it, right? As I've said many times, J.D. Vance loves Lena Khan, and that could very much be reflected in what happens in the future in terms of antitrust. But who knows what Trump will do? I mean, that's part of the thing. Nobody actually knows what he'll do. But yes, I think some businesses, some big businesses are going to like this because I think Trump is very susceptible to them being nice to Trump. Some big businesses won't like it because antitrust will be sicked on them. And I think the criteria by which antitrust is sicked on a business or not is whether they play ball with Trump or not. So I think what you're going to see is more politicization of business rather than less. Particularly with tariffs, you will see lots of exemptions. If you go back to 2016 and you look at the tariffs, A lot of people got exemptions, and it turned out that the people who got exemptions were the people who gave money to the Republican Party. So I think, as we all know, the closer, the more government gets involved in the economy, the more corrupt the economy gets in terms of intervention. Chris says Elon Musk hates Lena Khan. Yeah, and J.D. Vance loves her, and Trump will have to decide which side of that he's going to take. I would be shocked if Lena Khan doesn't lose her job, but still, I mean, the fact is J.D. Vance is going to advocate for appointing somebody who is closer to Lena Khan than otherwise. That is, I think Trump's people are very, very, very interested in strong antitrust enforcement. Very. So Elon Musk might not be, but everybody else is. And I don't think Elon will have a lot of influence with Trump, because I think ultimately, I don't think he will. I think there'll be a honeymoon. He'll do some stuff, and then he'll disappear from the Trump thing. Again, you can test my prediction in a few months and see if that turned out to be true or not. Lena Khan is the head of the FTC. She is the one suing all these companies for antitrust violations, although a lot of the lawsuits were started under Trump. All right, what else did I want to say? So why? Why did he win? I think there are two things that explain why he won. Maybe three things, two and a half things. Let's say three things. Two that I'm sure of. One is me speculating, and it'll be interesting to see what you guys think. The first, I'm pretty sure of. I've been saying this for years. It's not new. And that is that America is not a left-wing party, not a left-wing country. As Ayn Rand said, America will never go for communism. America will never go for woke. America will never go for crazy left-wing stuff. It will not go for explicit anti-Americanism. It will not go for explicit love of Hamas. It will not go for defund the police and BLM and the rest of the woke agenda. There was going to be a red wave in 2022 in response to woke. And the only reason there wasn't a red wave in 2022 was because of the abortion issue. The abortion issue is what allowed Democrats to win some significant positions in the House and prevent a big red wave and prevent the Republicans from taking over the Senate. Well, there are four reasons. I'm going to add another reason in a minute that relates directly to the Senate. So, look, the country's not woke. The country's not egalitarian. The country does not believe in egalitarianism. This country is still a country that believes in some form of merit and merit-based compensation and inequality based on performance. And the country celebrates that and embraces that and believes in that. The country is basically patriotic, and the country is basically pro-Western and pro-Israel and pro-Western values. And it does not appreciate young people with kafirs running around major cities and hoisting Hamas flags. Nobody likes that. And it doesn't matter what ethnic group they belong to. It doesn't matter where they come from, rich, poor, middle class. They just don't like it. They don't like the dissing of America in the way that the left has done. I've always said that I think the right is more of a threat than the left because the left does not resonate with Americans, and therefore the left will not be able to establish the kind of power and control over American life that a dictatorship, let's say, or an authoritarian regime can assess. I mean, across the board, whenever woke is up for a vote, Americans reject it. And I think to a large extent, Kamala Harris could not escape from her time in the Senate, where she was a Elizabeth Warren, way to the left senator. She could not escape her association with the woke. She could not escape her attempt to bring the Arabs in Michigan, in Dearborn, Michigan, to her side by dissing Israel and siding with Hamas. She could not escape the fact that she was associated with the far left. And this country is not that. It is a lot of things, but it is not woke. It is not left. It sometimes rejects the Republicans for a variety of reasons, usually that are justified, but it will not embrace defund the police. it will not embrace BLM. It will not embrace equality of outcome. And that's to the credit of the country. And as a consequence, it will not systematically and overwhelmingly vote Democratic as long as that is what the Democratic Party is perceived to be. So that's reason one. It's a rejection of egalitarianism, a rejection of the craziness of the left. And Kamala Harris was not a good enough candidate to be able to distance herself from that perspective. Maybe somebody like, the governor of Michigan, maybe somebody like the governor of California, though I doubt it. Maybe some other governor in the Democratic Party could have done that. Kamala could not. And partially because she didn't come out strongly enough for a centrist position. She didn't come out strongly enough for Israel. She didn't come out strongly enough for America. She ran away from identity politics. She did a good job there, but she couldn't escape the trap that the far left set for her. And this is a repudiation by the American people of the far left. That's reason number one. The second reason is, and I think the fact that she didn't choose Josh Shapiro was a reflection of that. I think choosing Josh Shapiro would have said, no, I'm a centrist and I'm moving to the Senate. Maybe it would have helped her, maybe not. I mean, all she needed to do was win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We're not talking about a lot of votes here. I mean, in spite of the fact that Trump won, it wouldn't have taken a lot for Kamala Harris to win. She needed those three states. And with Josh Shapiro, she might have gotten it. I'm not sure she would, but she might have. It is the fact that she did not strongly and vehemently enough repudiate the left. Second, the reality is, and you could see this in all the exit polls, and we know this because you could see that in people's attitude generally, the country is dominated by fear. By fear, by negativity, by anxiety, and by some hatred, but a lot of fear. Fear of immigrants, fear of the Chinese, fear of, the Russians, fear of Hamas, and of course fear of elites and everybody else. And we've talked about this many, many times. Donald Trump not only is brilliant at fueling that fear and encouraging that fear, but he's also brilliant at capitalizing on it. Part of the fear was a consequence of the fact that inflation is devastating. Inflation is the one thing, we saw that in the 70s and we saw it again now. Inflation is the one thing you pay a political price for. And nobody sits around wondering too long who caused the inflation. Would a Trump victory in 2020 change the trajectory of inflation? Nobody thinks that. Nobody actually does that thinking. Economists might do, but nobody in the public does that. Inflation happened under Biden. Inflation in the 70s happened under Jimmy Carter. They're out. That's it. We suffered. We don't like this. They're out. And indeed, inflation happened under Ford, and Ford and Nixon, and they were out, and Jimmy Carter was in. So inflation is something you pay a political price for. There's no way around it. And it doesn't matter that the cause of inflation started under Trump. It doesn't matter that Trump probably would have done the second stimulus package, which was inflationary, just the same as Biden. None of that matters. It happened under Biden, and that's what counts. And the fact that people saw prices go up caused them to fear even more. I think that is really that really enhanced the fear, the pessimism, the perception of a negative economy, the perception that things are terrible. As I said, I don't think the economy's bad. I don't think things are terrible. I don't think any of the most negative stories about what's going on in the economy are true. I think people's perceptions are wrong, and I think surprisingly and shockingly they will change those perceptions on a dime once the leadership changes. Once the perception of the leadership changes, their perception of reality will change as well. Inflation in the 70s didn't really start with Johnson, although Johnson's Johnson didn't last very long either. It started in the 70s, and Johnson didn't even run in 68. So those are the two big reasons. There is a third reason. And, you know, I don't want to generalize here, but this is a tricky one to talk about, but I think it is true. You know, part of the things that alienates people from the left is that it projects weakness, it projects softness, it projects, you know, a certain level of emotionalism, it projects a lack of masculinity. And maybe Waltz, the vice presidential candidate, is a good example of that. It's just not very strong, masculine. You know, it lacks that kind of self-confidence that is physical often. And I think Trump, in a perverse way, and I think it is perverse, but it is true, in a perverse way, represents masculinity, a masculinity that I think a lot of men are looking for. And whether they'll admit it or not. And it's also a masculinity that I think the Hispanic culture responds to, and I think a masculinity even Black culture responds to. And I think that it's a certain aggression, it's a certain physicality, it's a certain presence. I think you remember when he was shot and he got up and waved it and raised a fist. I think that had huge impact. At the time I said Trump has won, just based on that, because I think that really resonates with a lot of people, I mean, there was as far as I can tell, there was a huge female-male split here, almost in every age group, with men overwhelmingly voting for Trump and women somewhat voting for Harris. And I think that is men relating to this masculinity issue, and I think that might explain some of the issue with the Hispanic population and why they have shifted so much towards Trump. I think they've also feel like they've taken an economic beating by inflation, so they're captured with everything else. They're no different than everybody else in that sense. But I also think there is this issue of Trump's perception, because I don't think it's a reality, perception of a type of masculinity that people are responding to. All right, the last thing I wanted to say, and this relates to the Senate more than it does to the presidency. One of the interesting points is that, you know, a lot of Republican candidates did very well this cycle. Not only did they flip, well, they were expected to flip West Virginia, but Montana they flipped. They got a really good candidate, a Navy SEAL, and somebody who's a businessman, who's, you know, somebody who's really credible. They flipped Ohio. Again, this is the guy who lost to J.D. Vance, but was more normal than J.D. Vance, and that's why he lost in the primary 2 years ago. And now he was up and he won. The guy who might win in Pennsylvania is the guy who lost last time to Dr. Oz, was it? Dr. something? The crazy nutcase. The Republicans fielded normal candidates in Wisconsin and Michigan. And the only crazy candidates, as far as I can tell, that Republicans fielded this round was Kari Lake in Arizona. And it looks like Kari Lake in Arizona will lose, even though Trump will probably win Arizona. So I think the one lesson, but this was obvious, and this was obvious several cycles ago, and is that when Republicans put up candidates who are trying to be Trump but are not Trump, they lose. When they put up candidates that have many of Trump's ideas, many of Trump's ugliness, many of Trump's worst elements, they lose. Only Trump can get away with it. Only Trump has been able to create the package where he can say the stuff that he says, often completely crazy and nuts, and he can get away with it. Nobody else can. Kari Lake was the last attempt, and she failed. I think J.D. Vance somehow managed to squeak through, but other candidates, many candidates, particularly in the previous rounds in 2020 and 2022, could not, and did not. So that the American people are willing to accept the nutty, crazy things that Trump says from Trump, and seemingly from nobody else. But and this goes to my first point about the country not being democratic, right? Not being on the left. But when Republicans field what I would consider normal candidates that stand up for just normal human beings, they're just not crazy, they win. They win. And they put up a good fight even when they lose, like in Wisconsin and in Michigan, where the Democrats had a huge advantage in the Senate, and yet the Republicans did okay. When they put up the wackos, they lose. They lose big. So much of the Trump phenomena is wrapped up with Trump and is about Trump. And it's about his particular form of ugliness. And I think the reason for that is that he is perceived to be, I don't think he is, but he's perceived to be a fighter. He's perceived to be standing up to the enemies. The fact that he's vulgar, and the fact that he's often wrong when he stands up to enemies, and the fact that he doesn't stand for anything positive. He doesn't literally stand for anything positive. That is all brushed aside. He does not stand, I'm not going to repeat all the things I've said about Trump all the years. He does not stand for anything positive. All right. Yes, Katie Porter is out. Katie Porter was out when she tried to run for the Senate and lost. I assume the Democrats won the Senate seat in California. That would, I forget the name of the guy who won it. But the Republican put up, last I looked, decent numbers for California. All right, so that I think is what I have to say. In terms of where we go from here, I don't know. I'm eager to see. I think one indication will be, just in terms of how the world responds, what are the Iranians going to do? Iran was going to strike Israel any day now. Will they call it off completely because they're afraid of Trump? Will they go ahead with it in spite of the Trump victory? That'll be interesting to see. Adam Schiff is the guy who won in California. That'll be interesting to see. Again, we should expect very quickly here somebody from the Trump administration, maybe Trump himself, I doubt that, but somebody from Trump going to Russia and talking to Putin and trying to find some deal to cut vis-a-vis Ukraine. That'll be interesting. We will see. But I will say this: if Trump does what he said he would do, if he pulls it off, if he is successful, it's a disaster for the country. And maybe that's the best outcome. Because the worst outcome is that Trump doesn't do what he promised to do, that he somehow squeezes by, the economy does okay, everything's kind of okay. And in 4 years, J.D. Vance becomes president, which I think is getting us quite close to the end. All right, just to remind you, if you want to ask me a question, if you want to make a comment, if you want to tell me to do something, then use the Super Chat feature. To do that, I read all my Super Chats out loud to everybody. Everybody gets to hear them, and I respond to all of them. So, feel free to ask me in the Super Chat anything you might have on your mind. I am happy to address. I want to thank some of the people who've done some stickers. Wes Stewart, thank you for the $50. That's very generous. Really appreciate that. These are people supporting the show without even asking a question. So it would be great. We've got about 300 people watching right now. If some of you stepped up and supported the show. Brian Prince, thank you for the sticker. I know there were a bunch of you early on. Let me just try to get you. Jeremy Snavely, Eric, Berlin, and Brian, and okay, I think we got everybody. So just a reminder, those of you who'd like to support the show on a regular basis, you can do so on Patreon. on Patreon. You can also go to my website and support the show through the website, yaronbrookshow.com. But you can do it on Patreon. Would love to have you join the supporters of the show. Let's see. I just mentioned Alex Epstein is a sponsor of the show, alexepstein.substack.com, the world's expert on all things energy. And if you have any questions about energy, and I think somebody, by the way, so this is the one thing unequivocally that's good about Trump victory. I think Alex is going to have a lot of impact on the Trump administration when it comes to energy policy. I think the people who are likely to fill positions in the energy department are people who have talked to Alex, are people who have listened to Alex, are people who have engaged with Alex. If you'd like to see Alex's work and support Alex's work, alexepstein.substack.com. He can also supply you with the kind of talking points he's supplying politicians and future members of the energy, government establishment, who hopefully, the one thing that is probably going to be good is they're going to reshape and reprioritize the energy framework in the United States for the better. There's a lot of work to be done in energy, primarily liberating it, privatizing it, getting out of the way, and allowing the markets to function. And Alex is the one really pushing this. So that's the one thing that I have no doubt will be good coming out of the Trump administration, because I know that Alex has deep roots among people surrounding Trump who are big consumers of his content. You could be a big consumer as well of his content. All right, let's do this. We're going to go through the super chats. Starting with the $50, $20 ones. And then thank you, John, for the sticker. Really, really appreciate that. If anybody else wants to support the show while we're on live, please feel free to do so. We've got 354 people watching live. You know, a sticker of a couple of bucks from each one of you makes a huge, humongous, bigly, as Trump would say, difference for this show. And it's a trade, value for value. You're listening. You must get something out of it, even if you disagree. All right, Ryan says, in Trump's first term, he had a Republican House and Senate and did almost nothing he promised. Would you be surprised if he repeats this behavior again? Is Elon the wild card here? Thanks for doing your show today. Very difficult to tell. I mean, I do think that he didn't get much done. Remember, he was supposed to repeal Obamacare, and he got stuck. And the reason that first term is he had no real understanding of the legislative process. He had no understanding of the system of government that we had. He kind of thought he would come into the White House and just dictate, as a dictator would. And it didn't work out that way. And instead, what's expected of a president, and if a president really wants to have an impact on the world, then he has to go to the Capitol, and he has to shake hands, and he has to cut deals, and he has to convince people, and he has to use the bully pulpit, and he has to address the American people, and he has to do the hard work of politics in order to get legislation passed. I don't know that, I don't think Trump is capable of doing that. Now, will this time, as a lesson learned, will he surround himself with people who can do it, who will do it on his behalf? I don't know. That is a possibility. But then the question is, beyond tariffs and deportation, what does he actually want? You know, is he willing to sign some kind of comprehensive immigration legislation? Will that be a project? There was a bill that he basically vetoed and prevented Republicans from voting on. There was negotiated between Republicans and Democrats a few months ago. Will that bill be resurrected? Will a bill like that, plus something that has to do with, what do you call it? With legal immigration, expanding legal immigration or something like that, will a comprehensive immigration bill be passed? Will he repeal Obamacare? He keeps saying he will repeal Obamacare, but if he does, I think he recognizes he has to offer an alternative. And where is that alternative? And what is it going to be? How much of Project 2025 is he going to take on? Is he going to do away with the Department of Education? And if so, will he pass legislation to do so? Or will he just do it from an executive perspective? I don't know how he's going to govern. I don't know who the people are surrounding him. This is my fear. There are at least 3 think tanks in Washington, D.C. geared up to influence and staff a Trump administration. There's Heritage Foundation, which wrote 2025. There is Compass, which is CASS, C-A-S-S organization, which is a pro-right-wing government intervention, government managing of the economy, pro-tariffs, industrial planning, kind of Republican think tank, which is very influential and has the potential to be very influential. And then there's another think tank called America First think tank. And all of those think tanks will bring out, particularly the latter two, are going to bring out the worst elements within Trump. That is the statist, central planning, status and central planning and tariffs and all of that, all the really, and horribly anti-immigration, all the really, really bad stuff, they will push and they will promote and they will support and they will help him get through because they have the skill set to make that happen. And the question is, in this legislative agenda that he has for 2 years, he'll have a House and a Senate, and of course the Senate, he still has to deal with the filibuster. How much of their agenda will get passed versus any kind of free market leaning agenda? Again, tax cuts will happen, I think. I think he'll be able to do sometime reconciliation with the budget in order to get the taxes in so he doesn't have to have a 60-vote majority for it like he did last time. And he'll get the continuation of the existing tax cuts in the books. But again, remember the compromise there was that the tax cuts were not permanent. To make them permanent, he would have had to have the 60 votes. So they expire next year, and hopefully he can renew them for another, however, 10 years, 5 years, whatever that happens to be. So it's not a fundamental shift. I don't know what else he can get. Can he pass tariffs? He doesn't need Congress for tariffs. Can he do deportation? He probably doesn't need Congress for deportation. So my fear is that the things that he lands up doing are the things that do not require Senate and Congress, because he doesn't like dealing with the Senate and House. He just likes signing executive orders. I mean, I think most presidents do. The hard work of politics is not Trump's strong suit. Now, will Elon Musk be the wild card? I don't know. Again, I don't think Elon Musk has the patience for the kind of legislative process that is necessary in order to get things passed, in order to go to the House and go to the Senate and go to subcommittees and go to senatorial and congressional aides who do the actual work and actually write the bills and actually get them passed. Does he have that, or will he just do some superficial stuff that you can do as an executive without passing the actual legislation that actually makes the long-term difference? The real long-term difference is done by things like deregulation bills like the Jimmy Carter and the Ronald Reagan and even the Gerald Ford administration passed. Those are the things that make a difference. Tinkering at the regulatory agency level makes very little long-term difference, maybe short-term but long-term. What else can Elon Musk do? I don't know. Will Elon Musk give Trump good advice? I'm skeptical, reading and seeing what Elon Musk is saying. Elon is very pro-legal immigration, but I don't think anybody else in the administration is going to be. So he will be a lone voice for legal immigration. We'll see. I think my point is I don't know what's going to happen. It's very hard to tell because a lot of it depends on Trump's mood and a lot of it depends on the personnel he surrounds himself with. But I think it's much more likely the bad things will happen than good things will happen, but let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. We'll judge it as it happens. And I'm not sure Elon is a positive force. All right, I'm focusing on the ones that relate to the election right now. If it's not related to the election, I might spill it over to a show we do tomorrow, the day after, because I'm on a short leash because I've got an event coming up. Ooh, Not Your Average Algorithm just asked for $50. Is your assumption that because Trump won so handily, this will continue the domino effect towards unstoppable fascism? I suspect that hypothesis is overly dramatic. We'll probably see a boomerang stock market and mild tax regulatory reform. Yes, I think ultimately this leads us closer to fascism. It doesn't mean, or to some kind of real authoritarianism. It doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow. I don't think it's going to happen under Trump. But I do think this sets in motion the potential presidency one day of J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley and people like that. I do see the ascent of national conservatives and Christian conservatives and a growing role for national and Christian conservatives in government. I see a continued and accelerated erosion in the separation of church and state. I see a lot of bad things that move us towards Leonard Peikoff's prediction in the dim hypothesis of authoritarianism wrapped in a flag and with a cross on it. I still think that that is the most likely long-term outcome for the United States, and that this accelerates that long-term outcome. It just brings it that much closer to being a reality. It was probably going to be a reality no matter what you did. I think it was likely to be the reality. I just think this brings it much closer to that reality. I think that, I don't think Trump is, and I don't think these think tanks that I talked about, somebody mentioned the swamp, are interested in draining the swamp. I think at the end of the day, what most of these people want to do is they want to replace the existing swamp with their own swamp. They want to, as I said in 2016, they want to replace the swamp animals. They want to get rid of the swamp animals that are associated with the current administrative state, and they want to replace them with right-wing administrative state animals. But they don't want to drain the swamp. They don't want to get rid of the swamp, because the reality is that their power over our lives, their power over what happens in the world comes from the swamp. And they want the swamp to continue, because that's where they get their power from, that's where they get their pseudo-self-esteem from, that's what gives them levers of power. And that's what most people in politics and most people in administrative state want. And I think that is the case for most people who go into policy and politics. I don't know if the stock market is boomerang. I think there'll be mild tax reform. I agree with that. But if there are massive tariffs, that is devastating for the U.S. economy. If there's deportation, that is a new ugly phase in American history. If there's massive deportation, and then it depends on what Trump does. But generally, the orientation, the mood, the direction of the country is towards more authoritarianism, and I think Trump accelerates that tendency. And I don't think this is unstoppable fascism. I don't think anything in the future is unstoppable. I just think it's an issue of probabilities, and I think the probabilities have just gone up for authoritarianism happening sooner than they would otherwise. Jeremy says, a surprising bad thing for me was California rejecting Proposition 6, which would have removed involuntary servitude exemption for criminals in the state constitution. Interesting. Would have removed involuntary servitude. I guess I'm not surprised. I'm not too surprised that California went in that direction. I'd have to read what the proposition actually says. I'm having trouble really concretizing this, but I'll take a look. Ian, this country also believes that political violence is okay. The fact that very few people cared about January 6th and the coup attempt is depressing and terrifying. There are no guardrails left. I think that's absolutely right. I think that Americans don't care about January 6th. I think they don't care primarily because Biden was sworn in a few weeks later and everything returned to normal. I think they just view it as normalcy, as everything is normal. I think it is an absolute unmitigated disgrace that January 6th was not featured more heavily. But I think the primary blame there goes to Republicans who wouldn't impeach Trump. If they'd impeached Trump after January 6th, he couldn't run again. So the blame there is on Republicans. Remember also the young people who voted probably don't even really remember. They don't really hold January 6th. So it doesn't really resonate with them one way or the other. They were teenagers when it happened, and it doesn't stick. But yeah, the country is quite willing to embrace political violence. It's quite willing to embrace a revisionist history of all kinds, left and right, and we saw this in this election. But again, the country will reject the left every time. As I've said for years and years and years, I've told you this country will not go woke. It might go woke right, but it won't go woke left. Will not go woke left. Ali, when we have a president who will pull out of NATO and climate change agreement or make Europe pay their fair share, when will we have? I don't know that Trump will pull out of NATO. I don't think he will. Will he pull out of Paris Agreement? Probably. He did that before. It didn't really change much, but it's good. One of the good things he did in his first term was pull out of the Paris Agreement. Hopefully he'll pull out of this one again. Will he make Europe pay their fair share? Europe was already starting to pay more towards NATO, starting with the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014. If you look at the graph of European contributions to NATO, it really shifts upwards in 2014. Trump was just highlighting something that was already happening. It's accelerated. Scandinavia now, Scandinavian countries are actually, and of course now NATO is bigger because it has Finland and Norway, but Sweden and Norway. Sweden and Finland. Anyway, it has 2 additional Scandinavian members, although Finland doesn't like to be called Scandinavian. But those countries are spending way above the 2% required. I wouldn't be surprised if Europe raised it to 3%, and I wouldn't be surprised if Europe met those targets, not because of Trump, but because Europeans are afraid. And Poland is in excess of 3%. Again, the Scandinavian countries are around somewhere between 2 to 3%, 2% being the threshold. Europe has realized that they better start spending money, and part of that is because they don't trust America, they don't trust Trump, they don't trust Biden, they don't trust America, and partially is because they fear Putin, and that combination is going to increase defense spending significantly. Again, unless the far right succeeds in Europe, which it could, and befriends Putin, and forms a grand coalition with Putin, and as a consequence, don't feel like they need to spend the money, right? So everything's in flux right now. Everything is hard to tell what's going to happen. But will Trump leave NATO? I don't think so. But he might. Jeremy, Trump the loser had his 2 victories against the only 2 female major political candidates for president. Is this an incidental coincidence, or is it correlated to being able to win? I don't think it's a coincidence, in the sense that I said before. I think, in both cases, he comes across looking masculine, strong, powerful, as compared to shrill, relatively shrill women. Both Kamala and Clinton are kind of shrill, and I think that's part of it. I certainly think in segments of the population, the contrast of him being a man and kind of a gruff man's man, kind of masculine, supposedly. I don't consider that masculine, but conventionally masculine, as compared to these women, I think really played a role. How big of a role, I don't know. Oli, looking at the county by county election map, it seems like nearly every major city in the country went for Harris, yet all rural areas went for Trump. Yes, I mean, the reality is that the most productive parts of the country, go Democratic. The most rural parts of the country go Democratic. The most educated part of the country goes Democratic. And that Republicans generally, and it's becoming more so, not less so, rural, uneducated, rural and uneducated. That is the again, averages. Not everybody's like that, but that is the dominant thread if you're comparing Republicans and Democrats in terms of demographics. It is interesting. It's fascinating. That the Democrats come from the areas that are most productive, that create the most wealth. Jonathan Honig says, it's earlier than you think. Yes, it is. Much earlier. much earlier, and she said it 50 years ago, and it's still earlier than we think, right? God. Neil Kahn says, the GOP no longer represents me. There's a better chance to reshape the Democrats with Bill Clinton-style centrism for broader, lasting appeal. I think that's an interesting, I think that's, it might be the case that if the Democratic Party can really can take from this election a complete shedding of the far left, then maybe there's a better chance to convince them about free markets. And on the center left, you've got some center left economists who have a huge respect for markets, more respect for markets than a Donald Trump has. People like Noah Smith and people like Iglesias and others, and who are anti-woke and have been anti-woke maybe that's the future of the Democratic Party. If that's the future of the Democratic Party, then the Democratic Party can become the preferred party. It hasn't made that shift yet. As long as it is still committed to kind of far left egalitarianism, and as long as it's appeasing far left egalitarianism and giving them a big part of the party, they're unvotable. You can't vote for them. They're just awful. They're just awful. Robert, thanks, Yaron. We live in, quote, interesting times. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. It always seems to be interesting. Chris says, how much is Ukraine served by the territory they've taken in negotiations? Probably somewhat. It helps them. They'll get something from it. I think basically with Trump forcing negotiations, they will lose the Donetsk and Luhansk provinces. Maybe Ukraine can regain some of the south, and as long as the Russians have some kind of protected route, land bridge to Crimea. So sadly, I think Trump will force Ukraine to give up a lot of territory. The territory Ukraine has, better than nothing, but not a huge leverage. But we will see. The negotiation is going to be interesting, and whether a deal can even be struck, and whether Putin is even open to a deal is he's holding all the cards. Why would he want a deal, right? Jay Lord, do you think he will pull all government funds from BlackRock and other ESG funds, ending the woke movement overnight? No, because there are no government funds. The federal government does not have funds with BlackRock and ESG funds. The government funds that are in BlackRock and ESG are all all state funds and pension funds, and not federal government funds. So Trump has no leverage over the funds being allocated to BlackRock and such. And BlackRock has shifted away from ESG, and a lot of the other funds have shifted away from ESG. But all of that is state money. It's not federal money. The federal government Trump has no power over those funds. Any chance Biden ends his restraint of Ukraine? No, I don't see that. Biden's too weak and I don't think he cares enough. He's in shock and disappointed, and I don't think he's going to do anything dramatic before he leaves office. Chris, is Kamala more associated with the far left than Biden was? Yes. Biden never held positions that were far left positions. Kamala, during her Senate period, clearly held those positions. Kamala also did more to flirt with those positions. There are lots of quotes from her. Look, I think the other thing is Kamala is associated with the things that people fear, right? We talked about fear as a second aspect, and that is inflation, Biden administration. The second, the big one, is immigration. People are petrified of immigrants. They're scared of the invasion. And Kamala is associated with that. So they reject her because of association with the far left and because of association with mass immigration and with the inflation of the Biden administration. So she had a lot of things going against her. James says, is evil let back in because there's a lot of evil in most of us in today's world? Well, no, I mean, evil is let back in because the good the good parts of our society, the good parts of our world are quiet, are not taking a stand against it. So Elon Musk, who represents a certain aspect of the good in American society, teamed up with evil, Trump, in order to get it elected. Other of the good teamed up with Harris to get elected. You know, there is no party, there's no affiliation, there's no association of the good with the good and the good to strive for goodness. They all sell out, they all compromise, they all sell their soul to the evil. You know, this is a sanction of the victim. The sanction of the victim that Ayn Rand talked about you know, a long, long time ago, right? Her last speech in 1982 was about this. This is the sanction of the businessman, the sanction of the good. It's you know, I noticed that Scott is back. I don't know how. I'll have to figure out how to ban him again. But it's the sanction of it's the sanctions of people like Scott. As long as the this bad gets the sanction from the good people, it's going to keep weaseling itself back in. And that's on the left and on the right. I mean, that's true. Hopper, since Republicans control all three branches of government, will we see some major tax cuts in the next 2 years? So they can't do any permanent tax cuts without a filibuster, without 60 votes. So what you'll see is some permanent, some temporary. But no, I don't expect so. I think Republicans have some concern about the deficit. I do think they might cut corporate taxes a little bit. I don't know where else they'll cut. I mean, Trump has promised no taxes on tips, bizarre. No taxes on Social Security benefits, bizarre, given the state of Social Security. No taxes on some other stuff. Car loans, interest rate on car loans, maybe interest rate on credit cards. So Trump has promised an increase in the complexity of the tax system. That I think you could get constituencies around. You can get constituencies around more of a tax rate around mortgages, more of a tax rate around car loans, more of a tax. All that does is encourage people to go into debt, and all that does is complicate the tax system, and it does almost no good for anybody. But yes, for people who have the ability to hire high-priced lawyers and take all the deductions and figure out all the loopholes, they will benefit from whatever Trump does to the tax system. When what we really need is flatter, simpler, and lower taxes. Take away the complexity. Clark, how many Supreme Court justices will Trump be able to appoint? I mean, I think potentially 2, but both of them Republican. I think there's reason to believe that both Thomas and Alito will retire during Trump's presidency. Maybe, and depending on whether they think they can hold the Senate for the second 2 years, maybe in the next 2 years, one or both of them will retire. They will want to do it under Trump so that another Republican, another conservative gets appointed to replace them. And they're both in their late 70s. I hear, I don't have any particular, I hear, because I hang around lawyers, that Alito's tired and not very satisfied with the job. He doesn't really like it, and he's getting old. Thomas is getting old, and again, I think just he's done this for a long time. So there's a chance that both of those. I think the Democrats are going to try to hold on with the hope that a Democrat one day gets elected to replace them. So I think Trump will have the chance to replace 2 conservative Republicans with 2 conservative Republicans. Liam, is a female president unacceptable to a majority of Americans? I don't know to a majority of Americans, but I think to a certain percentage of Americans, yes. I think it's unacceptable so far. That'll change one day, but for now, it seems like that is at the margin a difference maker. But it's hard to tell for how many. Okay, Jonathan says, the Republican attitude is now free markets are for suckers. We need a strong leader to manage the economy for their own good. Yes, I think that's absolutely accurate description of the Republican attitude. I think there is a crazy, off-the-wall chance that if the Democratic Party could shed its Bernie Sanders and to the left and woke and Elizabeth Warren. Maybe they can't. Maybe this is just fantasy. Then the Democratic Party could become the free market party, which, you never know. Parties flip historically in America all the time. I'm not going to get to all the Super Chat questions. Let me just say that right now. The ones I don't get to, I will do tomorrow or the day after when I do the next show. I apologize, but I have to run. I've got a talk to give, and somebody's picking me up in a little while. Okay, Shali, I still do it by privatizing based on dollars. It seems that economy and immigration were the biggest issues for Republicans, whilst Democrats had nothing to rally around. Remain in Mexico or come back, and deporting violent illegals. I don't see much else changing in the economy. I hope you're right. Deportation, means deportation is off the table. That'd be great. It means tariffs off the table. That'd be great. But if those two things are off the table, then yes, then there won't be. This won't be a big deal from an economic perspective. Right? And hopefully that's right. I think a lot of people. Let me just say this. I think a lot of people voted for Trump, thinking that he's not really going to do the deportation thing. He's really not going to do the tariff thing. Everything will be fine. I think a lot of people voted for Trump. I think that's by far, probably 20, 30, 40% of the vote for Trump thinks that. And I hope they're right, because if they're wrong, the consequences are pretty bleak. Okay, Justin says, will Elon stop Trump from doing stupid things? I think Elon can be a smart advisor. I'm not convinced. I don't know. I don't know what the relationship really is like. I don't know what Elon wants to achieve. Again, I don't know how realistic he is about either the way government works or his relationship with Trump and how that'll work. I don't know. I hope so. It would be great if Elon turns out to be a political genius and a real thinker when it comes to political philosophy and figures out how to completely revamp the American government. That would be phenomenal. Yeah, we can be hopeful. We can certainly be hopeful. Rue Downs. A minority's attraction to masculinity is always a theory that I had, and I think that's why you see dictators being so popular in Africa and South America. And I think there's also a godlike aspect. Yeah, I think there is in those cultures more of a personality worship, and why in their own countries that happens. I don't want to generalize, and I don't want to say that's the case with Hispanics in the United States, because this is second, third generation Hispanics, and many of them have assimilated, and you'd expect them to have changed. But I definitely think the masculinity factor plays a role. Sid, is it likely Trump even attempts to end the DOE, Department of Education? I think it's very unlikely that he ends the DOE. Again, Ronald Reagan wanted to end the DOE, and in those days the DOE was very small and very weak. It had just been created by Jimmy Carter. It was a new department of government. The federal government never had a big role in education in America. And Ronald Reagan couldn't do it. He appointed William Bennett, who was a real smart neocon and Straussian. And William Bennett discovered, and I think he knew going in, even though he was committed to dismantling the DOE, he discovered, no, this is a great opportunity for me to instill conservative values into young kids and use this platform to try to influence education to do that. And we got the exact opposite. We got the Department of Education growing significantly under Reagan. Well, is Trump the man to dismantle the Department of Education? I very much doubt it. He appointed a pretty good person last time, DeVos, who resigned after January 6th, if you remember. I don't know who he'll appoint this time. It'll be interesting to see who he appoints. But again, I don't think there's been talk about Trump doing away with the Department of Education. I don't think he will. And granted, federal government does not have a big role to play in K through 12 education. Most of that is state. They do have a role to play in college education with the government loans and government grants and all of that. And it would be nice if they found a way to get out of that. But again, I would be shocked if that happened. Supkaski says the slow gradual decline of America begins. No, it doesn't begin. It's been going on for 100 years. It just continues. And it would have continued under Harris as well. So, let's be clear here. My view is, nothing's changed. Nothing much has changed. This is worse. This is a worse outcome than the alternative, in my view. And it's certainly worse if they win all the levels of government. But it's not a fundamental shift. It's not a fundamental change. It's much more dangerous. It's much more dangerous. And it's, I think it accelerates the decline towards authoritarianism. But the decline was there, and the decline would have happened under Harris. That is, it's not like Harris was a good candidate. Not like anybody was really excited about voting for Harris. I mean, the only reason to vote for Harris was to not vote for Trump, but it's not a great reason to vote for anybody. Enric, while Lyndon Johnson wasn't president in the 70s, his enormous spending in the Great Society and Vietnam War would bring financial problems. The financial problems of the 70s look to part of that. Yes, but the reality is that the monetization of that debt that Lyndon Johnson started taking on in the mid-60s, late 60s, only really manifested in the 70s. And for a long time, it was hidden by Bretton Woods, by the dollar being linked to gold. And it only became completely monetized and therefore inflationary in the Nixon administration after going off the gold standard. So it was really the Nixon administration that suffered politically because of inflation. Johnson, in a sense, they didn't realize that what they were doing was inflationary. Keynes hadn't taught them that, so they didn't know, or pretend they didn't know. Okay, Luca, why have people been predisposed to tribalism for most of history? Because individualism, it requires thinking. Thinking is an achievement. Thinking requires energy. It requires focus. It requires effort. And, human history, most of human history has involved most human beings gliding, just surviving, just doing what's necessary to survive and not really elevating themselves and making the effort to really think. It's an achievement to think. And there's been no philosophy that encourages that other than the Enlightenment, and it was weak. And we still are living off of whatever the Enlightenment managed to achieve. And so we still have thinking people, for example, in their professions and in technology and entrepreneurship and stuff like that. They don't use it across the board. If you study human history, what you see is how big of an achievement it is to be an individual, to be an independent thinker, to be willing to let reality be your guide. That is the unusual. And until we have a culture that really embraces that idea and rewards it, and Leonard Peikoff said once, we just haven't gotten, humanity's too young. We haven't understood what reason. We haven't understood reason as man basically means to survive. We haven't understood the mind enough. There's still a way to go. Okay, Crazy Pupil says, is it more likely that they try to use the threat of repealing Obamacare to negotiate or repeal it completely? I doubt they'll do anything with it because it's a landmine. They would have to propose something to replace it, which is not easy. It's super complicated. It would be hard to get everybody around. You'd have to get 60 votes, I think. It's a big deal to do this. There are some proposals. John Goodman has an institute in Dallas, I think, that has proposed a replacement for Obamacare. But you also need to reform Medicare and Medicaid, and you have to do comprehensive healthcare reform. And does Trump have the balls, the acumen, the political savvy to be able to pull off a reform of that scale, that magnitude, that depth? I don't see it. I wish. I mean, if he did that, it would be worth it having elected him. That's the one thing that would be worth it, right? Because it's such a big deal and so hard, and would make such a huge difference in the lives of Americans to move us towards privatization of healthcare, and including Medicare and Medicaid and Obamacare. I don't see it. And to try to do it, piecemeal, I just don't think it's possible. It's too complicated, and I don't think he has the political will or the political savvy to pull it off. All right, Steve says, this will be a quick answer. Can you share your thoughts on Peikoff's positive comments on Trump? I find it hard to believe the man who wrote Ominous Palace has nothing positive to say about such a wannabe dictator. No, I don't want to share my thoughts about it. I mean, you can read it and you can make your own assessment of it. I did a show on why I am against Trump, why I was against Trump, why I continue to be against Trump. You can listen to that. You can listen to Peikoff, and you can make your own mind. That's a judgment. I have too much admiration, respect, love for Leonard Peikoff to publicly criticize him. I see no purpose to it. We obviously disagree. It's obvious from here that we disagree. Leonard knows we disagree. We have discussed it, and I'm not going to say more than that. But the reality is, he was my teacher, mentor, and a really close friend, and I have no interest in publicly criticizing him. So I'm not going to comment on it. I've said that before. All right, guys, I know I did not unlock Scott. I think when I locked him, it was only temporary. I think I made a mistake when I locked him. So I will happily lock him again when I have a chance. And look, the main thing about Scott is not that he disagrees with me. Lots of you disagree with me. The main thing about Scott is how obnoxious, disrespectful, and just obnoxious in the way he was on the chat, which all it did was create conflict and he was trolling. There was no constructive purpose to having him on the chat. He was a destructive force on the chat. He was destructive to the other people in the chat. I got many requests to ban him for many years, and ultimately it was destructive for me. It was just too distracting. His nonsensical stupidity, and he's not smart, so it's not like he brings anything of value to the conversation. What he brings is his spewing of his emotions, and there was no value to that, so I banned him. It's a value proposition, win-win. You want to participate, and you want to be active, and you want to be engaged, and you want to do all that. A minimum of respect, and a minimum of just be a human being. And I'm happy to have you on board. There are a number of you I disagree with. I've banned 4 people maybe in the history of this show, which is going on 10 years. So Scott has just elevated himself to the level of being one of those people. There we go. Scott resurfaced for long enough for me to ban him, and I think this time it's permanently. Yes, he will say, "Oh, he just disagreed with me about Trump," but yeah, right. It's just that. But it wasn't just that. Anybody in the chat who was around there can testify to exactly what was going on. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the Super Chatters in particular for supporting the show. Those of you who did not do Super Chat, we're $27 away from the goal. So if anybody wants to jump in with $27, that would be fantastic. Those of you whose questions I didn't answer today, I promise I will answer. I've preserved them here. They're not going away, and I will answer them all, I hope, unless there's a technical glitch. And those of you who would still like to support the show, would like to see more of the Yaron Brook Show, and would like to see it continue and thrive, please go to Patreon or PayPal or even Subscribestar, and you can become a supporter of the Yaron Brook Show on any of those platforms. Just put Yaron Brook Show in, and you can do it. You can also become a member. Let me do this before I leave. I'm going to gift 5 memberships to 5 random people. Just got gifted a membership. You too can become a member. It's another way to do the show. Bobby just gave $27. It's his first Super Chat contribution. That is amazing. Thank you. Thomas did another $20. I really appreciated that. I really appreciate that. I also gifted a few memberships, so some of you now become members. I see Neil Khan. That's nice that he's a member. There's some good ones here that are members. This is good. And I will see you all. I don't know if tomorrow's another one of these busy days. I'm flying to Denver, and tomorrow night, there is the live stream tomorrow. There's the live stream. If you're interested in participating in the live stream, me and Tom Krauthammer talking about the election and prospects for the future and how to change the culture and how to give us a better political world in the future. You can watch it via live stream. To get the link, you can go to Defenders defendersofcapitalism.com. Defendersofcapitalism.com. And you will find a link to the live stream. I think it's $15, but that's less than a lot of you give a super chat. And it would be terrific to have you there participating. It's going to be a fun event. Tom is great. Mike Williams, who's going to be the host of the whole panel and the discussion, is amazing. And it's going to be a fun conversation. And while I was worried maybe we wouldn't know the results of the election, well, here we know them exactly. And we'll be able to comment on exactly what happened, which will be, again, a lot of fun. Let me remind everybody, your life is not determined by Washington, D.C. Your life, for the most part, your life is not determined by who is president. Your life is not determined by the politicians. Your life is determined by you. You get to decide the kind of life you're going to live. Don't let politics get you down or too high or too low. Nothing really fundamentally in a big scope of things with regard to your specific life has changed. Maybe we're accelerating faster towards authoritarianism, but you still have most of your life under control. If you want more about this, check out Yaron's Rules for Life, the playlist that is available, and you can see how you can take control of your life and make your life the best that it can be, no matter what the bastards, and all of them are, in Washington, D.C. ultimately do. Thank you, JF, for the super chat. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, James. Thank you, Thomas. And of course, thank you, Bobby, for getting us over the target. I appreciate you all. I will see you all in the next few days as I travel, spreading the word of capitalism, real capitalism, and freedom. I'm giving a talk today about the evils of democracy. I mean, majoritarian rule democracy. See you all.